I'm really excited to engage in a conversation about food. It's absolutely one of my favorite topics to cover from a science standpoint, but it's also one of my favorite things to engage in to really experience the sensuality of life. Recently, I got into the study of Epicurus, who was one of the Greek philosophers 2,000 years ago that really started to shape modern day philosophy. But as I dove into his work, it started to give me a whole new perspective on how I was failing to live effectively. And his focus was around the concept of pleasure and sensual pleasure. And this would go and give birth to the whole philosophy and practices of hedonism as we understood and the like. But as you go into his work, you realize what he was really talking about was being present and being in your full sense of awareness as a human being. And he considered this pursuit of pleasure as the highest role or purpose within the human life journey. And it was an interesting theory that I think as I've dove into it, I have to humbly admit that I have been actually repelled by the concept of pleasure on a lot of levels of my life subconsciously. I was raised in a Judeo-Christian home, very loving family and wonderful supportive little home church in Boulder, Colorado. It seemed very benign, but subconsciously in that worldview is this kind of piety and puritanical belief that we should always be in service, and pleasure and wealth is always putting you at risk of not making it to heaven and the like. And so there was this subtle, I think, aversion in my subconscious to really experiencing pleasure. And when we look at the human brain and the way in which we have developed as a species, we devote such a huge portion of our cerebral cortex to the sensory experience. And so this massive sensory of motion in the cerebellum, the joy of moving, we get all kinds of pleasure endorphins and all of this out of the experience of movement. And there's the whole half-third of the brain looks like a whole second brain behind our front brain is the cerebellum, and it's all about movement. And in using that whole massive cortex of the cerebellum, we start to experience the opportunity for pleasure through the motion. And we've seen the effect in hospitals and nursing homes being good examples, but I think prison systems being another example of this, where when we stop people from moving, depression and really collapse of biology is fast to follow. And so we need to start to re-envision sensory beyond our concept of touch and start to really think about the other sensory experiences that we have, perhaps beginning with motion. And so as we start to think about food and the pleasure of getting from this, I want you to always keep in the back of your mind, quite literally here, the power of movement within that. And we'll investigate that a little bit about what that means as we move through this discussion. The next sensory experience that we have is touch. And so this sensory experience of interaction with other things is extremely important to the brain, given the amount of space that we spend neurologically on this sensory skill. Behind that then is taste. We have this massive, deep brain experience with the tongue and the innervation of that tongue, as well as sensors throughout the different portions of the gut that are giving us a sensory experience with things like the chemical endorphins, which are like morphine that are produced out of our stomach and small intestines as we eat, the fat, salt, sugar combinations that can trigger cocaine-like response in the brain that are stimulants and the like. So we have all of these sensors and generative kind of endocrine functions throughout the system that give us a deep, deep sense of pleasure at many different levels through the induction of food and its movement through the body. The next one, of course, is sound, and hearing is such a massive part of life. And it's always interesting to work with film crews in the sense that they know, a good film crew knows that the soundtrack is going to be probably more important than the visual experience for the viewer. And I had no idea this was the case, not being in film or not really being in that creative context at all, until you experience a good film. And it turns out that much of your visual experience that you think you're having is being coded to you through sound. And so you can hear the sizzling of frying vegetables or something like that in a pan, And you will start to even be set up neurologically to taste that and to smell that and have all these other sensory experiencing from the sound itself, pre-coding certainly the visual experience that is late in the process. And so a soundtrack of life is one that we have dumbed down with overwhelming amount of input from our iPads and the like that are constantly bombarding us, not just with music, but with dings of alerts and updates and notifications that somebody's trying to contact us through Facebook or whatever it is, and you're constantly getting these distractions in your sound field. And so as we start to think about nutrition, I want to think about this true deep experience of Epicurus, which is we need to have the highest human experience of engaging all of these sensory components as we go in to this sensory journey of nutrition. And so we want to engage the whole brain into the food. And when we do this, a great piece to begin with is the movement piece. There's almost nothing as rewarding as walking out into a garden and harvesting ingredients that are about to go into the food you eat. Of course, you're getting a full sensory experience out of that. It's not just movement. You're getting the sounds of the birds, the tree frogs in the evening, whatever it is, the cicada here in Virginia, or you're getting that sensory load of the smells, the smell of the heat of green leaves. I don't know how I know what that smells like, but I think you do too. The smell of sunshine on tomato leaves has a distinct smell to it. It's different than a tomato. It is the smell of the leaf in sun. And interestingly, there's a very high ionic potential within the air when you see that photonic exchange happening. So sun coming in, touching the surface of a leaf, turning into biophotonic energy. And in the end, nutrition is a story about turning sunshine into human movement. We are biophotonic creatures that are taking all of the nutrients within the garden and turning them into enzymatic work, enzymatic activity, enzymatic resources to create energy within ourselves, which actually is electrical again, just as the sun is putting out that storm of electrons to heat the surface of the planet and the like. We are regenerating, we're taking a biophotonic adaptation or a biophotonic translation that happens from sun to food, and then turning it back from food to sunlight within our bodies. And so when we see these chronic arguments about should you eat fat, should you eat sugar, should you eat protein, we're missing the big picture here altogether. We've gotten ourselves tied up in these minutia arguments around almost irrelevant facts around nutrition, and yet it dominates 99% of the argument. And so we have to realize we are talking about a biophotonic relationship with Mother Nature when we start to think about food. And so I wanted to welcome you into the movement of outdoors. And this can be as simple as planting a mint plant outside. I've got a big patch of mint out in the circle, in the center of our circle drive, and it cannot be beat down. You cannot kill that stuff, you cannot control that stuff, and that's why I put it in the circle of the driveway, because you need something to contain mint. It will take over whatever it does. So I happen to be a bit of a brown thumb. I have a hard time keeping plants alive that I'm not constantly tending to. And so mint is like my gift in that I can leave for a couple months of travel and interaction with humans around the planet on different projects, and then I can come home and the mint is booming. Never been happier because I haven't meddled with it. And so with that mint, you can now go out there and have this rich, full sensory experience, movement out to there, and adding mint to a salad is a brilliant technique to bring a brightness and a full spring, summer kind of feel into that. And grow a couple of versions of mint. There's certainly spearmints and peppermints and the like, and each of those are going to give you a different experience. And infusing those into your tea in the morning or in the evening with some honey, fantastic way to get the gut starting to go into that parasympathetic relaxation phase. So mint outside is a good way if you're not a gardener and you feel intimidated by that. Get that interaction going. Of course, as soon as you step into the mint garden, you're going to start to smell it. You're going to get that sensory experience again, and then you're going to take a bite of that mint fresh off the plant. And in experiencing mint fresh off the plant, you have an opportunity to engage in nutrients that you're never going to find in a grocery store. It turns out that when we pick fruits and vegetables, it's beautiful to look at. And something like this, just brought over by a friend this morning, is giving you the opportunity to kind of think richly about the bounty of Mother Nature and how it wants to engage with us in its full sensual capacity. The colors in here blow the mind, right? The three colors of the cherry tomatoes, for example, the white stark background of the turnip, The greens, they're so classic for Virginia, are represented so nicely in the cucumbers or in the zucchini. The bright yellows of morning sun represented in the yellow squash. And you get that amazing like ombre effect of the apple skin as it moves from yellows to reds. And then of course the blossom of the nasturtium, just a crazy beautiful experience that is again edible, but edible on all the levels, right? And so you're really looking at the opportunity where you can actually go through a sunset experience if you do this short meditation within a nasturtium. It's asking us to interact not just through the bite, but through the fellowship with color. And one of my colleagues that I really have revere is up in New Jersey, and she's one of the foremost practitioners of color puncture, which is the process of putting colored discs over acupuncture sites to align the human energy field. And I believe that food can act as this potent color puncture experience where we can realign our own mathematics, our own vibrational biophotonic energy by interacting with the exquisite colors that you find in the nasturtium or in the bounty of colors across the vegetable palette. Sprouts, of course, are the most abundant with biophotonic energy because they're in the most rapid growth phase of their entire life cycle. And so broccoli sprouts, radish sprouts, and the like are some of my favorite things to add to a salad because of their sheer biophotonic energetics within that. And so we're looking at this bounty. But going back to that mint plant, I want to remind you that you're going to experiencing something much different in the garden when you're with the plant itself and you're smelling the sun on the mint and you're activating in your brain the experience there, and you're interacting with the microbiome on the mint or on the tomato before it's picked. And so as soon as you pick a tomato, you've changed the ecosystem on the tomato, for example, or on the mint leaf. A tomato that's been unpicked has tiny microscopic little hairs that aren't visible but are palpable. And so when you first pick a little tomato, you'll feel this tiny little bit of hair-like quality on that fruit. And that hair is a microenvironment for many, many different bacteria, fungi, and the like. And so you're going to be able to start to reseed your gut, prepare the gut with the very microbiome of the plant, if you can get yourself so close to the harvest that you're still getting in touch with that. And my favorite way to eat a tomato now is right off the vine. You simply pull the vine up to the mouth and you bite the tomato off the vine instead of picking it beforehand. By putting it straight in your mouth, you're going to get the entire microbiome intelligence of the tomato. You're going to feel that slightly peach-like fuzz on the surface of the tomato for a split instant, and then it's gone. If you pick the tomato and handle it for even a moment, those little micro hairs fall off and you get that slick, smooth tomato skin that you're used to experiencing. You've now lost that whole microbiome ecosystem that was in those hair-like fibers. The fiber, it turns out, is one of the most critical pieces of the fruit and vegetable. And so if you are blessed to eat it right off the vine, I think you're going to have many unique experiences in that. Certainly the mint tastes different biting it right off the plant than it will if you pick it. You're going to actually experience a lot more of the bitters and the tarts in the mint, where you're used to kind of having that sweet back end. And the bitters are actually the medicinal quality in the plant. So the alkaloids and the biophenols and all of these things that are busy in the plant medicine world are going to be experienced better right on the vine. And as the plant, or the fruit or the leaf that you've picked gets further and further from its source, both in time and space, I believe, you're going to start to see a decrement of those alkaloid medicines, and you're going to start to see a concentration of the sugars. And this is, of course, what happens with fruit. As you pick it and you allow it to ripen on the counter, it will get sweeter and sweeter, but in the process, it's losing, it's digesting, and breaking down its medicinal qualities. So get as close to the garden as possible to explode your sensory capacity. This is why farmers markets are so much more invigorating than are the grocery stores. When was the last time you walked into a grocery store produce section and smelled anything? You can pick up carrots in the grocery store and you can't smell them even when you put them up to your face. If you go out in the garden and pick a carrot, as you pull it out of the soil, the smell of carrot is overwhelming. And it's sweet and it's beautiful, and it has a little bit of this odd like umami scent on the backside, a very soil grounded kind of scent to it as well. And so through this whole spectrum of experiencing the garden and getting as close as possible, whether that be a farmer's market or a box from your CSA, you're going to have a sensory experience that's impossible to reach in the grocery store. The grocery store fruits and vegetables typically will come through supply chains that are thousands of miles long. Especially in winter months, we're getting produce from Peru and Ecuador and these massively distant gardens, and they have to be picked unripe and then ripened often under ethylene gas in the cargo containers to get them to ripen on the way to the store so that they look like they're ready to consume. In that process, they're long detached from soil, they're long detached from their biophotonic capacity, and they're losing medicinal quality. They're losing the biophenols and the scent and the smells that would be natural to them if you were closer to that garden state. So when you're eating in the winter, one cool tip is to remember to eat the flash frozen vegetables. So go to the frozen section of the store instead of your produce section during winter and get the flash frozen veggies from a closer location. And so you can eat more locally actually in the frozen section in wintertime than you can from the produce section. And so those flash frozen vegetables were picked ripe and flash frozen within 6 to 8 hours of picking, and now you're much closer to the garden through that experience. Frozen vegetables obviously have their limitations, frozen fruits and the like. There's certainly some downsides of that process, but I think from a medicinal standpoint and from those sensory experiences, it's a worthwhile endeavor to at least make that a significant portion of your wintertime consumption if you're in a seasonal environment. So as we start to think back to that surface of the tomato, we're in the discussion of fiber. And the big story beyond biophotonics of nutrition is the story of the microbiome. And so bacteria, fungi, and the like are critical now to human biology. And we can map cancer to autoimmune disease, to autism, to Alzheimer's, all of these back to changes within the gut flora, collapses of complexity of microbiome before we see the disease emerge. And so the real ground zero, if you will, is the ground within us. The soil within our organic garden of the gut is where we begin this journey into a healthy human body. And so your nutrition, we need to start thinking about it less about what the human body needs, and we need to start thinking more about what the gut microbiome needs. The gut microbiome needs a massive variety of nutrients. And in a split second, you're good at finding nutrient variety. And again, we can pick up the same bowl and show you what nutrient variety looks like. And what you're looking at, again, is color. And so the extraordinary analytical capacity of your eyeball with all the rods and cones in your retina are capable of being a complete chemical assay to the food that you consume. It can be tricked, is one warning. And so we can make a red tomato by pumping enough artificial nutrients into that tomato. And so you have to add a second sensory experience, or maybe a third, before you really know what the nutrient density of the food is. But the beginning is color. So you reach out and try to create the most colorful plate you can. The closer to the garden you get, the better you're going to win the game. And in that variety, you're going to demand a diversification of the microbiome. So each nutrient has a niche within the microbiome that's going to make that bioavailable to the human journey. And so that's the color experience. The next thing, of course, is going to be scent. And so in the grocery store or on the farmer's market, find the most beautiful fruit and vegetable that your eye might catch, but then smell it and see if you've been tricked by either having it picked too early or being artificially infused with chemical agricultural systems to make it look good. But if it's failing to smell like a cucumber, if you can't smell that rich cucumber base, I'd put it back and look for the next one. And so in that way, use your sight and smell as your grocery store shopping. And then the real proof in the pudding, as they say, is going to be in eating it. And so your tongue is an extraordinary analytical assay. It can measure thousands of chemicals in a split second. And in so doing, it's going to know whether you've got a really medicinal, life-giving piece of fruit or vegetable or not. So start with color, go to scent, and then finally, the tongue will tell this tale as to how close you are to that garden. The more micronutrients you get, the more opportunity you have for an explosion of micronutrient or microbiome diversity within the gut. And then to support that small ecosystem, large ecosystem within the gut lining, small bowel and colon being the emphasis here, fiber becomes critical. And so in all of our arguments over carbohydrates, protein, and fat, we forgot to talk about potentially the most important macronutrient within food, which is, of course, fiber. Fiber, it turns out, has many different varieties. There are soluble and insoluble types as kind of general concepts, but then within each category of soluble and insoluble fiber, there's vast variety of shapes and purposes. And again, it demands many different niches within the microbiome to interact with these fibers. But importantly, they create the the textural, three-dimensional coral reef type experience of the stool and biomatter as it moves through the gut that allows the niches to be formed within that coral reef-like structure of the stool as it develops in the composting process of your gut. So the composting effect of your bowels are going to be much improved with improved fiber. And the more variety in fiber, the better. And therefore, something like FiberCon or Metamucil, these are kind of like the probiotic, where it's a dumbing down of the concept of fiber, and it's just giving you one type of fiber at high doses, and it's going to give an oversimplified or dumbed down version of microbiome opportunity for diversification and support of the ultrastructure of the composting process within the bowels. And so in contrast, every fruit and vegetable in its vast variety is going to support both the diversification of microbiome through the nutrient demands and its variety, and through the support of the many different shapes and sizes of fibers, both soluble and insoluble, that are going to give that superstructure to the stool, to that composting process. Fiber, of course, is one of the critical pieces that is only present in fruits and vegetables. And so this is where that protein-dominant diet of the ketogenesis, I think, starts to fail. If you are ketogenic and failing to get enough fiber in your diet, you're going to ultimately fail your effort towards health. And so make sure that regardless of what you consider yourself, vegan, paleo, keto, I don't really care. I try to avoid those titles because I think they miss the forest for the trees all the time, because they keep arguing for a single macronutrient. It's carbs, it's protein, it's fat, whatever your friend is today, and you're always forgetting the fiber. And so make sure that you're getting that variety of 6 to 10 fruits and vegetables in any given day. And the salad, of course, is a great gift here. Just as we presented with the bowl of food, you can get so many varieties into just a quick experience. If you're doing the combinations of some microgreens and sprouting on the countertop and just a few little crops outside, it's easy to start to get this biodiversity. But make sure you're shopping those produce and frozen sections of the store for that color variation, for that nutrient diversity, and always emphasizing the variety of the fiber in the mix. As you start to go into nutrition and you start to realize that this is the way in which we fellowship with the sun and the soil, it is the biophotonic experience of the exchange of energy, and you're now bringing that back into your body. You're in a fellowship relationship with the microbiome itself as it digests all of your food. None of your food is for you. It's for the life-giving garden within you that's going to then make that bioavailable and feed you a different meal than is on your plate. And it's always going to be the right meal. An intelligent, diverse microbiome with all the bacteria and fungi and beyond is intelligent enough to know what you need today. And today you might need a lot more vitamin C, and so it's going to extract that and put that into a bioavailable fashion. You might need a lot more, interestingly, serotonin and dopamine in the day because you didn't get enough sleep, or you stressed your body through poor nutrition for a couple days. And the microbiome knows how to induce the production of serotonin and dopamine within your body by interacting with the gut membrane. And so whether it's neurotransmitters you need to produce or it's nutrient delivery that you need from the microbiome, it's smart enough to know what you need today. And I'm humbled by the fact that we've been given somewhere around 1.5 quadrillion nursemaids to take care of us every day. 1.5 quadrillion bacteria taking care of our bodies each day, not just within the gut, but now we understand it to be present within every organ system. Even the brain, the central nervous system that we thought was the holy of holies, the most sterile environment of the body, we now understand there's fungi and bacteria and viruses that are very important in those spaces to keep the neurologic vitality and biophotonic capacity alive and well. And so at every level, nutrition is turning you back into a solar event, turning you back into a light force energy. And this, I believe, is the best lesson that I've gotten in nutrition so far. Colleagues from Ikaria, Greece, came in to prepare a huge 5-course Greek meal that they had foraged in nature for 3 days to get all of the ingredients for this 5-course meal. And after this extraordinary experience, I got up to do this, what I thought was an eloquent toast about the importance of food and nutrition. And in the end, the gentleman stood up and said, "You missed the entire point. In Ikaria, Greece, which is one of the blue zones on the planet, many people living past 100 years, he said, we live long not because of the food we eat, but because of who we share it with." And in the end, he said, in Ikaria, we always set an empty chair for somebody at the dinner table that we hope will show up. And so there's this expectation of sharing a meal that makes it real. And I think that is a very true lesson for us. Too many of us as Americans and Western society livers are really eating in loneliness. I can't remember the statistic exactly, but it's some obscene number of like 20% of meals today are eaten in the car alone, not even at a table. And so we're eating out of our lap on the go and forgetting that we are energetic, spiritual beings in a biophotonic relationship with the sun, the soil, and the plant life around us. And we're given life to do life richly, not alone, but together in fellowship and in spiritual connection. And so as you consider getting closer to the garden, make sure you're bringing the grandkids, the kids, the neighbors into that experience. Sharing your garden with others is one of the most rewarding things that you can do. Share your garden with your neighbors, just as my neighbor has done today. And it's so much more special to receive a platter that looks like that beauty and that color when it comes imbued with love, prepared by somebody who cares for you and who wants to be part of your life. There's a whole nother spiritual content that's now imbued into the food itself. And it's in the sharing that we get the richest experience. So engage your community, engage your garden, and experience nutrition on a level perhaps you've never gotten to before. Enjoy the sensuality. You're here to do your highest purpose. Be in nature and sense and be nourished by all of her.